The Art of Self-Control, Build Discipline, Conquer Temptation, Achieve Greatness. Written and published by Rising Audiobook. Introduction. What if the greatest obstacle standing between you and the life you want is not a lack of talent, intelligence, opportunity, or luck? What if the real battle is happening inside you every single day? Think about it. How many times have you promised yourself that you would start tomorrow, stay consistent, resist temptation, or follow through on an important goal, only to find yourself distracted, discouraged, or pulled back into old habits? Most people do not fail because they are incapable of success. They fail because they cannot consistently control their impulses, emotions, and actions. The truth is simple but powerful. Every great achievement begins with a small victory over yourself. The athlete who trains when nobody is watching. The entrepreneur who keeps working when motivation disappears. The student who studies instead of procrastinating. The person who chooses long-term growth over short-term pleasure. These victories may seem insignificant in the moment, but they create extraordinary lives over time. The difference between successful and unsuccessful people is often not intelligence, talent, or resources. It is self-control, the ability to do what needs to be done, even when you do not feel like doing it. Now imagine your life if you could consistently make the choices you already know are right. Imagine mastering your habits, overcoming temptation, and becoming the kind of person who follows through on commitments without hesitation. In this audiobook, you will discover why self-control is the foundation of success, happiness, wealth, health, and personal freedom. More importantly, you will learn how to develop it, because when you learn to master yourself, you gain the power to master your future. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Why you fail to control yourself. Imagine sitting at your desk late at night with an important goal in front of you. Maybe it is an exam that could change your future. Maybe it is a business project, a fitness plan, or a skill you promised yourself you would finally master. You know exactly what needs to be done. You have the time. You have the ability. You even have the desire. Then your phone lights up. One notification becomes 5. 5 minutes become 30. 30 minutes become 2 hours. Before you realize it, the night is gone and the work remains untouched. The next morning, frustration arrives. You ask yourself the same question millions of people ask every day. Why do I keep doing this to myself? At first glance, the answer seems simple. You might think you lack discipline. You might call yourself lazy, weak, or unmotivated. But the truth is far more complex and far more hopeful. The first thing you must understand is that human beings were never designed for the modern world. For most of human history, survival depended on immediate rewards. If food was available, you ate it. If shelter was available, you used it. If an opportunity appeared, you took it quickly because tomorrow was uncertain. Your brain evolved to prioritize what feels rewarding right now. This tendency helped your ancestors survive. The problem is that the same programming still operates inside you today. The rewards have changed, but the brain has not. Instead of hunting for food, you scroll through endless feeds. Instead of searching for shelter, you seek comfort and entertainment. Instead of facing physical dangers, you face distractions designed to capture your attention every second of the day. Deep inside your mind, there is a constant struggle taking place. One part of you thinks about the future. It imagines long-term success, meaningful achievements, and better possibilities. This is the part that creates plans, sets goals and dreams about becoming more than you are today. The other part is concerned only with the present moment. It wants comfort now, pleasure now, relief now. When these two forces collide, the future often loses. Not because you are broken, but because immediate rewards create powerful emotional signals. Future rewards are usually invisible. They require patience, sacrifice, and trust. Your brain can feel the pleasure of checking social media instantly. It cannot feel the reward of passing an exam 6 months from now. This explains why intelligent people often make decisions that seem irrational. Knowledge alone is rarely enough to change behavior. Most people already know what they should do. They know they should exercise. They know they should save money. They know they should eat healthier foods. They know they should focus on meaningful work. Yet knowing and doing are often separated by a wide gap. That gap is where self-control lives. One of the biggest mistakes people make is believing that self-control failures reveal a flaw in their character. When they procrastinate, they think they are lazy. When they overeat, they think they lack willpower. When they abandon a goal, they assume they simply do not have what it takes. But many failures are not character problems at all. They are system problems. Consider a student preparing for an important examination. He sits down with good intentions. His textbooks are open. His schedule is clear. But his phone is beside him. Every few minutes a notification appears. A friend sends a message. A short video catches his attention. An algorithm carefully studies his behavior and delivers content specifically designed to keep him engaged. Hours disappear. The student blames himself. What he often fails to realize is that he is fighting against systems created by thousands of engineers, psychologists, and designers whose job is to hold his attention for as long as possible. The battle is not fair. Modern environments are built to exploit human weaknesses. Fast food is engineered to be irresistible. Streaming platforms automatically suggest the next video. Social media rewards attention with endless novelty. Online shopping offers instant gratification with a single click. Everywhere you look, powerful systems compete for your focus, energy, and self-control. This does not mean you are powerless. It simply means you must stop misunderstanding the nature of the challenge. Self-control is not about becoming a different human being. It is about understanding the human being you already are. The more you understand your impulses, the less they control you. The more you understand your weaknesses, the more effectively you can manage them. The more honestly you accept your human nature, the more capable you become of rising above it. True self-control does not begin with force. It begins with awareness. The moment you stop seeing yourself as the enemy, you can finally begin studying the real enemy, the invisible forces, habits, environments, and impulses that quietly shape your decisions every day. And that realization changes everything, because once you understand why you lose control, you can finally learn how to take it back. Chapter 2. The Price of Living Without Self-Control. There is a moment in every life that seems harmless when it happens, yet quietly shapes everything that follows. It is the moment you choose comfort over effort, distraction over focus, or impulse over intention. At the time it feels small, almost invisible. You tell yourself it does not matter. You say you will fix it later, start tomorrow, change eventually. But life does not record intentions, it records actions. And over time, these small, unchallenged decisions begin to build a silent cost that you do not notice until it has already accumulated into something heavy. Living without self-control rarely collapses a life in a single dramatic event. Instead, it erodes it slowly, like water wearing down stone. One delayed responsibility becomes a habit of delay. One impulsive purchase becomes financial pressure. One skipped workout becomes a weakened body. One ignored conversation becomes distance in a relationship. None of these moments feel catastrophic alone, but together they form a pattern that quietly determines the quality of your future. The tragedy is that most people do not recognize the pattern until they are already living inside its consequences. The truth is, every lack of self-control carries a price, even if the bill does not arrive immediately. When you repeatedly choose instant gratification, you are not just enjoying the present, you are borrowing from your future, and like any debt, it must eventually be repaid. The repayment often comes in forms people do not expect: stress, regret, missed opportunities, and a growing sense that life is harder than it should be. It is not life punishing you. It is the accumulation of choices that were never questioned in the moment they were made. This impact spreads into every area of life. In finances, it appears as spending without planning, chasing short-term satisfaction, while long-term stability slips further away. In health, it shows up as neglected routines, poor habits, and a body that slowly loses energy and strength. In relationships, it becomes emotional neglect, impulsive reactions, and the inability to invest time and patience into meaningful connection. In career growth, it manifests as procrastination, distraction, and the avoidance of difficult but necessary work. Self-control is not just a personal trait. It is the foundation that supports every pillar of life. What makes instant gratification so powerful is not that it is strong, but that it is easy. It asks nothing from you except surrender. It offers relief without effort, pleasure without patience, and escape without responsibility. In contrast, discipline demands resistance. It asks you to delay comfort, to sit with discomfort, and to trust outcomes you cannot yet see. That is why so many people drift toward what is easy instead of what is right. But ease has a hidden cost, and that cost is always paid later in the form of limitation. Consider someone who repeatedly postpones exercise and healthy eating. At first, there is no visible consequence. Life feels normal. There is always tomorrow to start, but months turn into years, and the body begins to reflect every neglected decision. Energy declines, fatigue becomes familiar, health issues emerge quietly, then persistently. Suddenly, the price of those small daily choices becomes undeniable. What once felt like harmless delay now feels like lost vitality. The cost was never immediate, but it was always being recorded. Yet this truth is not meant to create guilt. It is meant to create awareness. Because the moment you understand the price of undisciplined living, you also begin to understand the power of changing it. Self-control is not about restriction. It is about protection. It protects your future from being stolen by your impulses. It protects your potential from being buried under distraction. It protects your life from being shaped by habits you never consciously chose. The difficult reality is that no one else pays this price for you. Every decision compounds in your own life. But this is also where your power begins. The same mechanism that builds regret can also build strength. Every time you pause before acting, every time you choose effort over ease, every time you resist an impulse, you are rewriting the direction of your future. The consequences of discipline are not always immediate, but they are always real. The price of living without self-control is not just what you lose, it is who you slowly become. A person shaped by reaction instead of intention, a life guided by impulse instead of purpose. But the moment you begin to notice these patterns, you are no longer trapped inside them. Awareness is the first break in the cycle, and from that break, a different life becomes possible, one built not on what feels good for a moment, but on what holds value for a lifetime. Chapter 3. How Self-Control Creates Success. Before success ever becomes visible to the world, it is first built in silence, inside the private moments when no one is watching, no one is praising, and no one even knows what you chose to do. It is in those unseen hours that self-control either strengthens or weakens. And long before people call someone successful, disciplined choices have already been shaping their path quietly, almost invisibly, like roots growing beneath the surface of the ground. Success is often misunderstood as a moment of arrival, but in reality, it is a pattern of repeated behavior. It is not built by occasional bursts of motivation, but by consistent, disciplined actions, carried out even when emotions are uncertain. High achievers are not driven by constant excitement. They are driven by structure. They understand that feelings change, but commitments must remain steady. On days when motivation disappears, discipline steps in. On days when distraction calls loudly, focus answers quietly. This is where success begins, not in inspiration but in repetition. Self-control plays a central role in this process because it determines whether a person acts based on impulse or intention. Without self-control, effort becomes inconsistent. One day there is progress, the next day there is delay. One week is productive, the next is lost to distraction. This inconsistency slowly builds a life of frustration where potential exists but results do not fully appear. But when self-control is present, effort becomes stable, actions become predictable, and over time predictability turns into trust. not only from others, but from yourself. This self-trust is something many people overlook, yet it is essential. When you consistently keep your promises to yourself, even the small ones, you begin to build internal reliability. You start believing in your own word. And when you believe in your own actions, hesitation decreases, doubt weakens, confidence becomes natural, not forced. High achievers are not always more talented. They are often more reliable to their own decisions. They do what they said they would do, especially when it is inconvenient. One of the most powerful effects of self-control is the ability to stay focused on long-term rewards instead of short-term comfort. Most people understand what they want in the future: better health, financial stability, meaningful success, but struggle to align their daily behavior with that vision. The present moment always feels louder than the future. It demands attention, it offers quick relief, but those who develop self-control learn to pause before reacting. They begin to see beyond the immediate temptation and ask a deeper question: what kind of future is this choice building? This shift in thinking changes everything. Instead of chasing momentary satisfaction, effort becomes an investment. Studying is no longer just studying, it is building a career. Saving money is no longer restriction, it is building freedom. Practicing a skill is no longer repetition, it is building mastery. Self-control transforms ordinary actions into meaningful progress because each action is connected to a larger purpose. And when actions carry purpose, discipline stops feeling like pressure and starts feeling like direction. Over time, this consistency creates something powerful: momentum. Small disciplined actions may not seem significant in isolation, but they accumulate, like drops of water filling a container. They slowly form something substantial. A person who chooses discipline daily begins to separate from their past version. Their thinking sharpens, their habits stabilize, their results start to reflect effort that others may not fully understand. From the outside, it looks like sudden success, but from the inside, it is simply accumulated control. There is also a deeper emotional transformation that happens through self-control. A person begins to feel less chaotic internally. Decisions become clearer. Regret becomes less frequent. Anxiety caused by inconsistency begins to fade. Instead of being pulled in multiple directions by impulses, life starts to move along a clearer path. This clarity is not accidental. It is the result of mastering thoughts, emotions, and actions one decision at a time. In the end, success is not reserved for a select few. It is shaped by those who are willing to stay consistent when it is uncomfortable, focused when it is difficult, and disciplined when it is easier not to be. Self-control does not guarantee instant achievement, but it guarantees direction. And direction, repeated over time, becomes destiny. Chapter 4. The Foundation of Self-Control. Look closely at any meaningful achievement in life, and you will eventually arrive at the same place. Not talent, not luck, not intelligence, not even opportunity. You will find a person who learned how to make difficult choices consistently. A person who kept going when quitting would have been easier. A person who chose what mattered most over what felt best in the moment. This is the foundation upon which lasting success is built. It is called self-control, and despite its simplicity, it remains one of the most powerful advantages a human being can possess. Many people spend their lives searching for secret formulas. They look for shortcuts, hidden strategies, and special advantages that will allow them to reach their goals faster. Yet the truth is often much less exciting and far more powerful. The quality of your life is largely determined by the quality of your daily decisions. Every decision acts like a brick. One brick means very little, but over months and years, those bricks become the structure of your future. Some people unknowingly build walls that trap them. Others build foundations that support everything they hope to become. Self-control is what determines which structure you create. Without it, personal growth becomes almost impossible. Growth requires sacrifice. It requires patience. It requires the ability to endure temporary discomfort in exchange for future rewards. Whether you are trying to improve your health, develop a new skill, strengthen a relationship, or build financial security, the process always demands choices that are uncomfortable in the short term. That discomfort is where most people stop. Not because they lack desire, not because they lack potential, but because they lack the ability to consistently manage themselves when comfort and convenience begin calling their name. One of the greatest misunderstandings about discipline is the belief that it limits freedom. People often view discipline as a cage. They imagine rules, restrictions, routines, and obligations. They see self-control as something that removes enjoyment from life. Yet the opposite is often true. A lack of discipline creates far more limitations than discipline ever could. The person who cannot control spending habits loses financial freedom. The person who cannot control unhealthy habits loses physical freedom. The person who cannot control emotions often loses peace of mind. The person who cannot control distractions loses the freedom to focus on meaningful goals. In every case, the absence of self-control eventually creates consequences that restrict choices. Discipline, on the other hand, expands possibilities. When you consistently save money, you gain options. When you care for your health, your body supports you rather than limits you. When you develop skills, opportunities begin to multiply. When you learn to manage your emotions, your decisions become wiser and more intentional. True freedom is not the ability to do whatever you want in every moment. True freedom is the ability to choose what is best for your future, even when your emotions suggest something else. That is a completely different kind of power. Self-control also transforms the way you make decisions. Most poor decisions happen when emotions temporarily overpower judgment. A person feels angry and says something hurtful. A person feels bored and wastes hours on distractions. A person feels stressed and seeks relief through unhealthy habits. The decision itself often lasts only seconds, but the consequences may last for months or years. Self-control creates a pause between feeling and action. In that pause, wisdom has room to speak. Instead of reacting automatically, you begin responding intentionally. You stop becoming a passenger in your own life and start becoming the person behind the steering wheel. This ability may seem small, but it changes everything. The difference between a fulfilled life and a regret-filled life is often found in these tiny moments of choice. Moment by moment, decision by decision, day after day. Another truth that many people resist is that long-term success depends far more on behavior than talent. Talent certainly helps. Natural ability can create advantages, intelligence can open doors, but none of those qualities guarantee success. History is filled with gifted individuals who wasted enormous potential because they lacked discipline. At the same time, countless ordinary people achieved extraordinary results because they consistently showed up, worked hard, and remained committed long after others gave up. Talent may determine where you start. Behavior determines how far you go. This should be encouraging. You cannot always control your natural gifts. You cannot control where you were born, the opportunities you received, or the circumstances you inherited. But you can control your actions. You can control whether you keep your promises. You can control whether you continue learning. You can control whether you choose growth over excuses. These choices belong entirely to you, and over time, they become far more powerful than talent alone. The foundation of self-control is not perfection. It is not about never making mistakes or never feeling temptation. It is about developing the ability to guide your behavior toward what truly matters. Every great life is built upon that foundation. Every meaningful achievement depends upon it. Every lasting transformation begins there. Because when you learn to control yourself, you gain something more valuable than any external advantage. You gain the ability to shape your own future, and there is no greater power than that. Chapter 5. Mastering your inner world. Before a single action is taken, before a word is spoken, before a decision becomes visible to the outside world, something far more subtle has already happened within you. A thought has appeared, almost unnoticed, almost effortless, And yet, from that invisible beginning, an entire chain of emotion, impulse, and behavior quietly starts to form. Most people never see this process unfolding. They only see the final outcome and wonder why their life feels the way it does. But everything you do begins in the quiet architecture of your mind. Thoughts are not harmless background noise. They are the first signal in a powerful internal system that shapes how you feel, how you respond, and ultimately who you become. A single thought can change the direction of an entire hour. A repeated thought can shape the tone of an entire day. And a dominant thought, left unchallenged over time, can become the framework through which you interpret your entire life. This is why mastery of self-control does not begin with behavior, it begins with awareness of thought. When you think a thought like, "I cannot do this," something immediate happens inside you. Your body responds before your logic has a chance to intervene. Energy drops, motivation weakens. The task suddenly feels heavier than it did moments ago. On the other hand, when you think, "I will try anyway," the body shifts again. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Emotion follows thought, like a shadow follows light. This is the hidden connection most people live inside without ever questioning it. They believe emotions arrive randomly, but in reality, they are often shaped by what the mind repeatedly tells itself. This is where emotional awareness becomes essential. Not emotional control in the sense of suppression, but emotional understanding in the sense of recognition. Most people are carried away by their emotions because they never pause long enough to observe them. They feel frustration and immediately act on it. They feel anxiety and immediately avoid responsibility. They feel comfort and immediately drift toward distraction. In each case, emotion becomes command instead of communication. But emotions were never meant to control your actions. They were meant to inform you. They are signals, not instructions. Anxiety may be pointing toward uncertainty that needs clarity. Frustration may be pointing toward a boundary that has been crossed. Desire may be pointing toward something you value. Yet when you fail to observe emotions, you lose the ability to interpret them. And what you do not understand will eventually begin to control you. The shift begins when you learn to notice without immediately reacting. In that small space of observation, something powerful develops. Choice. Instead of being pulled into automatic response, you begin to see the pattern before it fully takes over. You start recognizing how a thought creates a feeling, and how that feeling tries to push you toward a certain behavior. And in recognizing it, you are no longer completely inside it. Alongside thoughts and emotions, there is something even more constant, shaping your life, your internal dialogue. The voice that speaks inside your mind throughout the day. It comments on your progress, your failures, your possibilities, and your limitations. For many people, this voice is inconsistent. It can be encouraging one moment and destructive the next. It can motivate you in the morning and undermine you by evening. Over time, this internal conversation becomes one of the most influential forces in shaping your behavior. If your internal dialogue is harsh, you begin to believe you are incapable. If it is fearful, you begin to avoid challenges. If it is dismissive, you begin to undervalue your own potential. But if that same voice becomes more stable, more patient, and more observant, your entire decision-making process begins to shift. You start responding differently, not because the world has changed, but because the interpretation of the world has changed. This is why mastering the inner world is not about silencing the mind. It is about understanding it. You do not need to eliminate thoughts. You need to observe them. You do not need to suppress emotions. You need to recognize them. You do not need to fight your internal voice. You need to become aware of how it influences your direction. Mastery begins with observation, because observation creates distance, and distance creates freedom. When you are fully identified with a thought, it feels like reality. When you observe it, you begin to see it as an event in the mind, rather than a command for action. That simple shift changes everything. Over time, this practice builds a different kind of strength. Not loud strength, Not forceful control, but quiet stability. You begin to notice that you are less reactive. You are less easily pulled into emotional extremes. You are more capable of pausing before responding. You start to feel that your inner world is no longer something happening to you, but something you are actively learning to understand. And in that understanding, self-control becomes less about effort and more about awareness. You are no longer constantly fighting yourself. You are watching yourself with enough clarity to choose your direction with intention. That is where real mastery begins, not in controlling every thought or emotion, but in finally seeing them clearly enough that they no longer control you. Chapter 6. The battle between discipline and desire. There is a moment, often unnoticed, that decides the direction of an entire life. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It happens quietly, almost invisibly, in the space between an urge and an action. You feel it when you know exactly what you should be doing, yet something inside you gently pulls you elsewhere, not with force, but with comfort, not with logic, but with ease. And in that small moment, the battle begins. Discipline and desire are not enemies in the way people often imagine. Desire is not evil, and discipline is not cold punishment. Desire is simply the voice of immediate relief. It asks for comfort now, reward now, escape now. Discipline, on the other hand, speaks for a future version of you that cannot yet speak for itself. It asks for patience in exchange for something greater that has not yet arrived. Both voices exist within every human being. The difference between those who grow and those who remain stuck is not the absence of desire, but the ability to choose which voice to follow when both are speaking at the same time. Temptation exists because the human mind is built to respond to opportunity and reward. For most of human history, survival depended on quick decisions. If something felt pleasurable or useful, acting on it immediately often made sense. The brain evolved to prioritize what feels good in the present moment, because for ancient humans, the present moment was often all that could be guaranteed. But the modern world has changed faster than the human brain. Now you live in an environment where reward is constant and effortless. Entertainment is instant, food is always available, distractions are endless, and comfort is only a click away. Your brain, however, still operates with ancient wiring. It treats immediate pleasure as highly valuable, even when it conflicts with long-term goals. This is why temptation feels so natural. It is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a reflection of how your mind is designed. Every meaningful goal in life exists on the far side of resistance. There is always something that must be delayed, ignored, or overcome. A student must resist distraction to learn. A worker must resist comfort to build consistency. A person trying to improve their health must resist habits that feel easy but lead nowhere meaningful. Without resistance, there is no progress. This is where willpower enters the picture, but not as a magical force. Willpower is not something you either possess or lack. It is something that strengthens through use. Every time you choose discipline in a small moment, you are training your mind to tolerate discomfort without escaping it. Every time you pause instead of reacting, you expand your ability to choose. Over time, these small decisions accumulate into a stronger internal capacity. But willpower alone is not enough to explain why people succeed or fail in the long run. If it were only about inner strength, then every highly motivated person would succeed. Yet reality shows something different. People with strong intentions still struggle, not because they lack desire, but because they underestimate the power of environment. Your environment is constantly shaping your behavior, often without your awareness. It determines what is easy and what is difficult, what is visible and what is hidden, what is available and what requires effort. And human behavior naturally follows the path of least resistance. If distraction is always within reach, focus becomes harder. If unhealthy options are easier than healthy ones, discipline weakens. If negative habits are constantly triggered by surroundings, willpower is drained faster than it can recover. In many cases, people are not failing because they are weak, but because their environment is silently working against them. This is why lasting change often begins not with motivation, but with structure. When you design your environment in a way that supports your goals, you reduce the number of internal battles you need to fight. You are no longer relying solely on moment-to-moment willpower. Instead, you are shaping conditions where discipline becomes the natural outcome. Still, even in the best environment, temptation does not disappear. It appears in quieter forms: a delay, a distraction, a small compromise, a moment of comfort that feels harmless. And in those moments, the mind begins to negotiate. It tells you that one exception will not matter, that you can return to discipline later, that you deserve a break. These thoughts are not lies in a dramatic sense. They are distortions of urgency that make the present moment feel more important than it actually is. Overcoming temptation is not about eliminating these thoughts. It is about recognizing them without immediately obeying them. It is the ability to create a small pause between impulse and action. In that pause, awareness returns, and in awareness, choice becomes possible again. The real battle between discipline and desire is not fought once. It is fought repeatedly in ordinary moments that seem insignificant at first, choosing to start when you feel resistance, choosing to continue when you feel tired, choosing to stop when you feel tempted to overindulge. These decisions are quiet, but they accumulate into identity, because in the end, you are not defined by your goals alone. You are defined by what you consistently choose when no one is watching, when no one is rewarding you, and when no one is forcing you. And every time you choose discipline over desire, even in the smallest way, you are not just resisting temptation, you are reshaping who you are becoming. Chapter 7. Building Unbreakable Discipline. There is a quiet moment in every person's life when they begin to realize something uncomfortable, yet deeply honest. The life they are living is not shaped by what they intend, but by what they repeat. Not by what they dream about, but by what they actually do when no one is watching and when nothing is forcing them. This realization does not come loudly. It arrives slowly, through missed opportunities, unfinished goals, and promises made to oneself that were slowly forgotten. And in that silence, a truth begins to form. Discipline is not something you feel. It is something you build. Most people search for motivation as if it is the missing piece. They wait for energy, inspiration, or the right time to begin. But motivation is unreliable. It rises and falls without warning. It appears strongly one day and disappears the next, leaving behind the same unfinished tasks and unchanged habits. If a life depends on motivation, it will always remain unstable. Discipline, however, does not depend on emotional weather. It depends on repetition. Repetition is where transformation actually begins, not in dramatic decisions, but in small actions repeated consistently over time. The first time you try a new habit, it feels forced. The second time, it feels awkward. The third time, it feels slightly more familiar. And somewhere beyond that repetition, something subtle begins to change. You stop negotiating with yourself as much. This is because the mind is not built for sudden change, but for patterns. It learns through exposure, not intensity. Every repeated action sends a message to your brain. This is who we are becoming, and slowly, without noise, identity begins to shift. At first, small habits feel meaningless. A few minutes of focus, a short walk, a small task completed without delay. The mind often dismisses them because the results are not immediate. But this is where most people misunderstand discipline. They expect visible transformation before invisible repetition has done its work. The truth is that small habits are powerful not because of what they do in a single day, but because of what they build across hundreds of days. Like drops of water shaping stone, they seem insignificant alone, but unstoppable together. Consistency is the real foundation of discipline, not intensity. Intensity burns quickly. It creates short bursts of effort, followed by exhaustion. People often mistake intensity for commitment. But intensity is emotional. Consistency is structural. A person who studies intensely for 1 week and then stops will always fall behind someone who studies moderately but never stops. A person who trains hard occasionally will always lose to someone who trains steadily over time. Life does not reward bursts of effort as much as it rewards patterns of effort. This is why routines are so powerful. A routine removes the need for constant decision-making, and decision-making is where most willpower is lost. Every time you decide whether or not to do something, you spend mental energy. Over time, that energy weakens your resistance to distraction and temptation. But when something becomes a routine, you no longer argue with yourself. You simply follow the structure. You reduce emotional negotiation. You reduce hesitation. You reduce internal conflict. In this way, routines do not just organize your time, they protect your willpower. Willpower is often treated like a limitless force, but it is not. It is a limited resource that weakens with overuse. Every small decision, every moment of resistance, every internal battle consumes it. That is why people often feel more distracted or impulsive later in the day. Their willpower has been slowly depleted. A well-designed routine protects that energy. It reduces the number of choices you must make. And in doing so, it preserves strength for moments that truly matter. But perhaps the most important truth about discipline is this: it is built in ordinary days, not extraordinary ones. Not when you feel powerful, not when everything is aligned, but when nothing feels special and you still choose to act anyway. That is where real strength forms, quietly, repeatedly, without applause. Consider a simple example: a writer who commits to writing just 500 words every day. On most days it does not feel significant. Some days it feels easy, other days it feels forced, and many days it feels like nothing meaningful is happening. But the writer continues, not because every day feels inspiring, but because the rule does not change. Over time, something remarkable happens. Those small daily actions begin to accumulate. Ideas develop, skill improves, thinking deepens, and without dramatic effort or sudden breakthrough, an entire book quietly takes shape. Not because of one moment of inspiration, but because of hundreds of moments of repetition. This is how discipline becomes unbreakable, not through force, not through motivation, but through identity shaped by consistent action. Eventually, you stop asking whether you feel like doing something. You simply do it because that is what you do. And in that shift from trying to being, you discover something powerful. Discipline was never about control alone. It was about becoming someone who no longer needs to be controlled. Chapter 8. The Power of Delayed Gratification. There is a quiet battle that takes place every single day inside the human mind. It is not loud, not dramatic, and not visible to the outside world. It is the battle between what you want now and what you want most. In this space, discipline is tested, not in grand heroic moments, but in small decisions that seem insignificant at first. The decision to resist comfort, to delay pleasure, and to stay committed to a future you cannot yet see. Most people lose this battle quietly, not because they are weak, but because the reward of impatience always feels closer, louder, and easier. Yet those who learn to pause, to wait, and to choose long-term reward over short-term satisfaction begin to reshape their entire destiny. Delayed gratification is not about denying life its joy. It is about understanding that every desire does not need immediate fulfillment. When you train yourself to wait, you are not losing pleasure, you are building control, and control is power. A mind that can delay satisfaction becomes less reactive and more intentional. Instead of being pulled by impulses, it begins to move with purpose. This shift changes how decisions are made. You stop asking, "What feels good right now?" and start asking, "What will serve my future self?" That simple change in question can redirect an entire life. But the truth is, this path is not comfortable. There will be moments when impatience screams louder than reason. You will see others enjoying what you are denying yourself, and doubt will quietly enter your mind. It will whisper that maybe you are being too strict, too serious, too slow. In those moments, self-control feels like loss instead of strength. Yet this is where most transformations are decided, because discomfort is not a sign that you are on the wrong path. Often it is proof that you are finally stepping onto the right one. The ability to sit with that discomfort, without escaping into easy pleasure, is what separates those who dream from those who build. Think about a simple paycheck. One person receives it and spends it quickly, chasing immediate satisfaction, new clothes, gadgets, dinners that feel rewarding for a moment but fade quickly. Another person receives the same paycheck but chooses differently. They set aside a portion, invest it consistently, and live with patience that often feels unrewarding in the moment. Years pass. While one struggles with the same cycle of earning and spending, the other slowly builds financial stability, then independence, and eventually freedom. Nothing magical happened. No sudden luck arrived. Only the quiet discipline of delayed gratification repeated over time transformed their reality. This is the hidden truth of greatness. It is rarely built in moments of excitement, but in moments of restraint. Every time you choose patience over impulse, you are making a deposit into your future self, and those deposits accumulate into strength, confidence, and opportunity. Delayed gratification is not a limitation, it is an investment in a life that is no longer controlled by urgency, but guided by vision. In the end, delayed gratification is not a single act, but a way of living that quietly reshapes who you become. It shows up in the small choices no one applauds. The moment you choose to study instead of scrolling endlessly, the moment you save instead of spend, the moment you continue when quitting would feel easier. Each of these moments feels ordinary, almost invisible, yet together they build an identity rooted in discipline. You do not suddenly become a disciplined person. You become one decision at a time. And over time, these decisions begin to stack, forming a life that feels more stable, more intentional, and more free. Freedom, in its deepest sense, is not the ability to do everything you want immediately, but the ability to choose what you want most over what you want now. When you understand this, patience stops feeling like sacrifice and starts feeling like strength. And in that strength, you begin to discover a version of yourself that was always waiting beneath the urgency. Chapter 9. Taking control of your mind. There are battles that never show on the surface. No one claps for them, no one notices them, and yet they decide the direction of an entire life. They happen inside the mind, in the silent space between a thought and a reaction. In that space, everything is either won or lost. Taking control of your mind is not about stopping thoughts from coming. It is about deciding which thoughts deserve your energy and which ones must be left to fade away. Most people believe they are controlled by circumstances, but the deeper truth is that they are often controlled by their own unexamined thoughts. A single negative idea, if repeated enough, can shape behavior, weaken confidence, and slowly create patterns of avoidance. This is how self-sabotage begins, not as a dramatic failure, but as a quiet acceptance of thoughts that should have been questioned. When you do not challenge your thinking begins to challenge your life. Focus, therefore, is not just concentration. It is protection. It is the ability to guard your attention from everything that does not serve your growth. In a world filled with constant noise, notifications and interruptions, focus becomes a rare form of strength. It is not something you either have or don't have. It is something you train. Every time you bring your attention back from distraction, you are strengthening your mind like a muscle. Weak focus is not just a productivity problem, it is a life direction problem. When your attention is scattered, your results become scattered. You start many things but finish few. You feel busy but not fulfilled. This creates frustration, not because you lack ability, but because your energy is constantly leaking into unnecessary directions. Mental discipline is the skill of closing those leaks and directing energy toward what truly matters. The good news is that the mind is not fixed. It can be trained, reshaped and strengthened through repetition. Negative thinking loses power when it is no longer obeyed. Distractions lose control when they are consistently resisted. Self-sabotage fades when awareness replaces impulse. Mental discipline is not built in a single moment. It is built in thousands of small decisions where you choose clarity over confusion. Over time, this mental training creates emotional stability. You are no longer easily shaken by external events or internal doubts. Instead of reacting instantly, you respond with awareness. Instead of spiraling into negativity, you observe your thoughts and choose differently. This space between stimulus and response becomes your greatest source of power. There is a moment when you realize that your life has always followed the direction of your dominant thoughts. Not your hopes, not your intentions, but the thoughts you repeated and believed without question. This realization can feel uncomfortable at first, because it removes the illusion that life simply happens to you. But it also gives you something far more powerful: responsibility. Because if thoughts shape behavior, and behavior shapes life, then changing your thoughts changes everything. Taking control of your mind does not mean silencing every negative idea forever. It means refusing to live under its authority. It means noticing it, questioning it, and choosing not to obey it. Each time you do this, you weaken the grip of old patterns and strengthen a new identity built on clarity and discipline. Over time, focus becomes natural, not forced. Self-sabotage becomes rare, not routine. And mental discipline becomes the foundation upon which everything else in your life is built. You begin to experience a different kind of strength. Not loud or visible, but steady and unshakable. A strength that allows you to move through life with direction, even when emotions fluctuate. And in that state of control, you finally understand that mastery of the mind is not about perfection. It is about awareness, choice, and consistency. It is about becoming someone who does not drift through life, but someone who directs it. That is where true discipline begins, and where a new life quietly starts to take shape, built entirely on conscious thought, deliberate action, and inner control. It begins. Chapter 10. Emotional Self-Control. A heated room. Voices rising faster than understanding. Words thrown like weapons instead of bridges. In that exact moment, something subtle but powerful decides what happens next. Not the situation itself, but the emotional control of the person inside it. One breath taken too quickly can turn into regret. 1 second of patience can prevent damage that takes years to repair. Emotional self-control is born in moments like this, where pressure rises and the mind is asked to either collapse into reaction or rise into awareness. Emotions are not the enemy. They are deeply human signals, shaped by experience, instinct, and perception. Anger often signals injustice. Fear signals uncertainty. Sadness signals loss. Even frustration signals unmet expectations. The problem is not that emotions exist, but that they are often allowed to lead decisions without question. When emotions drive behavior, logic becomes secondary, and outcomes become unpredictable. Self-control does not mean suppressing emotions. It means understanding them without being controlled by them. The ability to regulate emotions is one of the strongest foundations of success, relationships, and leadership. A person who cannot control emotional reactions may have intelligence, talent, or ambition, but will still struggle to maintain stability in life. Emotional discipline is what allows communication to remain respectful during disagreement, decisions to remain rational during pressure, and actions to remain aligned with long-term goals rather than short-term impulses. It is the invisible skill behind trust, respect, and influence. In relationships, emotional self-control becomes even more important. Many conflicts are not created by the original issue, but by the reaction to it. A small misunderstanding can grow into a major argument simply because emotions were allowed to escalate without pause. When people react immediately, they often say things they do not mean and create distance they do not intend. But when someone learns to regulate their emotional state, they create space for understanding instead of destruction. That space is where real communication begins. At the core of emotional discipline is a simple but powerful shift: the ability to respond instead of react. Reaction is immediate, automatic, and often driven by emotion alone. Response, on the other hand, is intentional. It creates a pause between feeling and action. In that pause lies freedom. It is the moment where you are no longer a prisoner of emotion, but a participant in choice. This pause may last only a few seconds, but it has the power to change the entire direction of a conversation, a decision, or even a relationship. Calmness plays a critical role in better judgment. When emotions are intense, perception becomes distorted. The mind tends to exaggerate threats, misunderstand intentions, and focus only on what supports the emotional state. Anger makes everything feel like disrespect. Fear makes everything feel like danger. Stress makes everything feel like pressure. But calmness restores clarity. It allows the mind to see situations as they are, not as emotions interpret them to be. This clarity leads to wiser decisions, fewer regrets, and stronger outcomes. Emotional self-control is not about being emotionless. It is about being emotionally aware without being emotionally overwhelmed. It is the ability to feel deeply, but still think clearly. This balance is what separates impulsive reactions from thoughtful actions. Over time, this skill becomes a form of inner strength that others can sense. People naturally trust those who remain steady in chaos, because stability feels safe in an unpredictable world. Consider a moment during a heated argument. Two people are exchanging words, both feeling misunderstood. The tension is rising, and every sentence risks making things worse. In this moment, one person chooses to pause. Instead of interrupting, they listen carefully. Instead of raising their voice, they lower it. Instead of reacting emotionally, they take a breath and respond with clarity. That single shift changes everything. The energy of the conversation softens. Defensiveness begins to fade. Understanding becomes possible again. What could have turned into lasting conflict becomes a moment of resolution. This is the quiet power of emotional self-control. It does not erase conflict from life, but it changes how conflict is handled. It transforms emotional storms into manageable moments. It turns reactions into responses and chaos into clarity. And most importantly, it protects relationships, decisions, and opportunities from being damaged by temporary emotions. In the end, emotional self-control is not a sign of weakness or restraint. It is a sign of maturity and strength. It is the ability to remain steady when everything inside urges you to react. And in that steadiness, a deeper form of intelligence emerges, one that is not ruled by impulse, but guided by awareness. That is where true control begins, and where lasting stability in life is quietly built. Chapter 11. Winning the War Against Bad Habits. A habit rarely announces itself when it begins. It slips quietly into daily life, disguised as comfort, convenience, or relief. One small repetition, one harmless choice, one moment that feels too insignificant to question. And then, without warning, that single moment becomes a pattern, and the pattern becomes identity. This is how the human mind slowly builds chains that feel invisible at first, until one day they feel impossible to ignore. Bad habits are not created in dramatic decisions. They are built through repetition, through the quiet approval of just this once. Over time, the brain begins to recognize these actions as familiar pathways. What once required choice becomes automatic. This is the habit loop at work. Cue, craving, response, reward, repeated so often that it no longer feels like behavior, but nature. And that is why breaking a habit is not just about willpower. It is about rewiring something the mind has learned to trust. The first step in winning this internal war is awareness, not judgment, not guilt. Awareness. Because you cannot change what you do not see clearly. Most people struggle, not because they lack discipline, but because they never fully observe the pattern they are living inside. They notice the outcome, lost time, low energy, regret, but they rarely trace it back to the moment it begins. Awareness is the moment you stop living on autopilot and start watching your own behavior with honesty. And in that honesty, something powerful begins to shift. You start noticing the triggers, the emotional states that lead to the habit, the environments that encourage it, the thoughts that justify it. You begin to see that the habit is not random, it is predictable, and anything that is predictable can be changed. This realization alone weakens the habit's control because it moves the behavior from mystery to mechanism. But awareness is only the beginning. Real transformation requires action, and more importantly, replacement. Simply trying to remove a habit leaves a gap, and the mind does not like empty spaces. If you only try to resist, the old behavior eventually returns under pressure. That is why replacement is more powerful than elimination. You do not just remove the habit, you give the mind something better to do instead. A smoker, for example, does not only fight the urge to smoke, the urge still appears, the cue still triggers the craving, but instead of surrendering to the old response, they choose a new one, a short walk, a deep breath, a glass of water, a moment of stillness. Over time, this new response begins to interrupt the old loop. The brain slowly learns a different association with the same trigger, and what once felt automatic begins to lose its grip. This process is not fast, it is not easy, and it is rarely perfect. There will be moments of relapse, moments of weakness, moments when the old habit feels stronger than the new intention. But transformation is not defined by perfection, it is defined by persistence. Every time you interrupt the habit, even partially, you weaken its authority. And every time you return to your chosen replacement, you strengthen a new identity. Because at the deepest level, breaking a habit is not just about behavior, it is about identity. It is about shifting the internal belief of "this is who I am" to "this is who I am becoming." Old habits survive because they are tied to familiar versions of yourself, but growth requires letting go of those versions, even when they feel comfortable. And that letting go is where real strength begins to form. Over time, something remarkable happens. The habit that once felt uncontrollable begins to fade. Its urgency weakens. Its emotional pull softens. What once felt like a need becomes just a passing thought. And in its place, a new pattern takes root. One built through repetition, awareness, and conscious choice. You do not destroy the old habit with force. You replace it with consistency. And in this process, you reclaim something far more valuable than the habit itself. You reclaim control. Control over your time, your attention, your energy, and ultimately, your direction in life. Because every habit you break is not just an ending, it is a space being cleared for something better to grow. In the end, winning the war against bad habits is not a single victory. It is a series of small decisions repeated with patience. It is choosing awareness over blindness, replacement over resistance, and persistence over frustration. And slowly, quietly, those decisions reshape not only your habits, but the entire trajectory of your life. Chapter 12. Self-Mastery and Greatness. A life does not change in a single dramatic moment of victory. It changes in the quiet realization that you are no longer the same person who used to give in so easily. There comes a point when temptation still appears, distractions still call your name, and old habits still whisper familiar invitations, but something inside you no longer obeys them in the same way. That moment, subtle and almost uncelebrated, is where self-mastery begins. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply emerges as a new relationship between you and your own impulses. Self-control is often seen as a struggle, a constant effort to resist what feels easy. But over time, when practiced consistently, it transforms into something deeper. It becomes self-mastery, the ability not just to resist temptation, but to understand it, observe it, and rise above it without inner conflict. At this stage, discipline is no longer forced. It becomes natural. The mind no longer feels like an enemy to be controlled, but a system to be guided. And this shift changes everything about how a person lives, thinks, and grows. Greatness is not built in extraordinary moments. It is built in thousands of ordinary decisions that most people overlook. the decision to wake up when it is easier to sleep, the decision to continue working when motivation fades, the decision to speak carefully instead of reacting emotionally, the decision to stay consistent when no reward is visible yet. Each of these moments feels small in isolation, but together they form the architecture of an exceptional life. Greatness is not a single achievement. It is the accumulation of disciplined choices repeated over time until they become identity. What most people fail to see is that every undisciplined choice also accumulates. Every delay, every excuse, every moment of surrender builds a different future, one shaped by avoidance instead of effort. Life is always recording, always compiling, always moving in the direction of your repeated actions. This is why self-mastery is not about intensity, it is about consistency. It is not about being perfect for a day, but about being reliable for a lifetime. Reliability to your own standards is what slowly separates ordinary living from extraordinary achievement. Lifelong growth requires a mindset that refuses to settle. Self-mastery is not a final destination where discipline is no longer needed. It is a continuous practice of refinement. Even the most disciplined individuals are still learning, still adjusting, still observing themselves. They understand that growth is not something you complete, it is something you participate in daily. And this participation requires humility, because it demands that you accept that there is always a better version of yourself waiting ahead. This is where many people stop growing. They believe discipline is only necessary until they reach a certain level of comfort or success. But true self-mastery understands that comfort is not the goal, expansion is. The moment you stop growing, you begin to decline. Not because you are failing, but because life naturally rewards movement, not stagnation. Self-mastery keeps you in motion, not through pressure, but through purpose. It transforms effort from something you must do into something you choose to do. As this lifelong discipline deepens, something unexpected begins to emerge: freedom. Not the kind of freedom that comes from doing whatever you want in the moment, but the deeper freedom that comes from no longer being controlled by impulses. When you master yourself, you are no longer pulled in every direction by emotions, distractions, or external pressures. You become steady, you become intentional, and in that intentionality, you gain the ability to shape your life instead of reacting to it. True freedom is not the absence of structure, it is the presence of self-governance. It is the ability to act according to your highest values, even when it is inconvenient. It is waking up each day, knowing that your choices are aligned with your future, not just your feelings. And in this alignment, life becomes lighter, not because challenges disappear, but because internal conflict reduces. There is peace in knowing that you are not fighting yourself anymore. In the end, self-mastery is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming fully yourself without being interrupted by distraction, weakness, or impulse. It is about clearing the noise so your real potential can finally be heard. Greatness is not something you chase, it is something you uncover through disciplined living. And when self-control matures into self-mastery, life no longer feels like a struggle against yourself. It becomes a steady expression of who you were always capable of being. A quiet truth remains: after all lessons are spoken and all struggles are understood, life does not change because of knowledge alone, but because of what you consistently choose to do with it. Everything you have explored in this journey points back to a single, undeniable foundation. Self-control is not a moment of perfection, but a lifelong direction of progress. It is built in small attempts, imperfect efforts, and repeated returns to discipline, even after failure. Every time you choose restraint over impulse, clarity over distraction, and effort over ease, you are not just making a decision for the present. You are quietly shaping the architecture of your future. These choices may feel insignificant in isolation, but together they form the unseen structure of your life. No disciplined action is ever wasted. It becomes part of who you are becoming. The real battle for success is never fully external. It is fought in silence, inside thoughts no one hears, and decisions no one sees. Before the world recognizes achievement, there is an internal victory that must first be won. The victory over distraction, temptation, and inconsistency. What appears as success on the outside is always the result of discipline mastered on the inside. Your habits, more than your intentions, are what ultimately shape your destiny. They decide your direction when motivation disappears. They define your outcomes when willpower feels weak. And over time, they become the quiet force that builds or breaks the life you live. This is why every habit you strengthen is an investment in your future self. And in the end, the greatest victory you will ever achieve is not over the world around you, but over the world within you. The moment you learn to master yourself, you no longer live at the mercy of impulse. You begin to live with intention, and in that mastery, you discover something deeper than success. You discover control, clarity, and a life truly shaped by your own design.